Welcome to Daily Review, your daily dose of literary exploration. We dive into books that spark curiosity and ignite growth.
While our passion often leads us to nonfiction reads that empower and improve your life, no book is off limits.
From gripping thrillers to insightful memoirs and compelling fiction to historical accounts, we're here to share and discuss all the interesting reads we discover.
Tune in for your next great book idea.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Daily Review. We truly appreciate you joining us for your daily dose of literary exploration. Your support means the world to us and helps us continue to share these amazing books with you.
If you're enjoying what you hear, please consider taking a moment to subscribe, rate, like, and comment on any of the platforms you're listening from. This really helps support our channel and allows us to get better and bring you even more great content.
If today's review sparked your interest and you're ready to dive into a copy of the book, please consider using the link in our description to make your purchase.
Not only does it make it easy for you to get your hands on the book, but it also directly supports our channel and the author, allowing us to keep bringing you more great content. Thanks again for being a part of the Daily Review community.
Okay, so today we're doing a deep dive into some powerful excerpts from a really moving book, When Breath Becomes Air by Paul Kalanithi.
Yeah, this one definitely stays with you. It's just profound.
It really is. Our goal here is basically to unpack some of the key insights Paul shared. He had this unique perspective, right? A brilliant neurosurgeon, almost at the finish line of his training.
And then suddenly, he's a patient facing terminal cancer. He's seeing it from both sides.
Exactly. So we want to follow that journey, his early wrestling with big questions about life and meaning through literature or science.
Then the intensity of medical school and residency.
And finally, how he confronts his own mortality and what he learned about what actually makes a life meaningful when faced with death.
It's quite a story. We've pulled out some key parts of the book to guide us.
All right, let's get into it. So Paul's start wasn't exactly what you might expect for someone heading to Stanford and Yale Med. He grew up in Kingman, Arizona.
Which, as he points out, was apparently the least educated district in the U.S. back then.
But his mother was determined that wouldn't hold him back. The book really highlights her influence, pushing education, giving him this amazing reading list way ahead of his peers.
Yeah, instilling that love for language early on. He talks about reading 1984 when he was only 10.
Which is intense. He said he was scandalized by the adult themes, but just captivated by the language itself.
Books became more than just stories for him. They were like confidants, shaping his moral compass. Brave New World, for example, got him thinking, is just being happy really the point?
And those big questions clearly stuck. At Stanford, he dives into both English and human biology.
Trying to tackle that fundamental question, what gives human life meaning?
Right, from two angles. Literature for the life of the mind.
And neuroscience for the mechanics, the rules of the brain.
There's this really striking moment he describes. He reads this kind of pulpy novel, Satan, his psychotherapy and cure. Not exactly high literature,
Yeah.
but it sparks this huge realization for him. The mind is the brain in action. He found it almost magical that all the richness of meaning comes from biological stuff.
That tension between the feeling of meaning and its physical source seems central to his whole journey. He even had this choice, right? Study meaning academically with monkeys in a lab.
Or go experience it directly at some wilderness camp.
And he chose the camp. He wanted that richness, the relationships, the lived experience.
And that choice he was pretty significant later on. A visit to a home for people with severe brain injuries really crystallizes something for him.
He sees the suffering, but also makes this connection, a smile from one patient.
But then his professor has this incredibly blunt reaction. Sometimes it's better if they die.
Wow, stark.
Yeah. But for Paul, it underlined just how fragile the brain is and how tied it is to our ability to connect, to have meaning.
And that fragility, that link between the physical brain and the self, seems to push him towards medicine, even though he already had a master's in English Lit.
He felt this nagging sense, he calls it, that you couldn't just speculate about life and death from books. You needed to be in it.
Moral action over just thinking about it. Direct experience.
It's fascinating, though, him coming to medicine from that humanities background. How do you think that shaped him compared to someone just purely focused on the science?
Well, I think it gave him a why. Someone focused only on science might be amazing at the technical side, the diagnosis, the treatment.
Sure.
But Paul was already thinking about the person inside the patient, their story, their identity, what makes their life meaningful to them. He wasn't just looking at the biology. He was looking for that human connection, that different sort of sublime he talks about, found in relating to people who are suffering.
It makes you think, doesn't it? Sometimes you really do need to step outside your lane, experience something different to get a fresh perspective on your own stuff. Maybe you felt that pull, listeners, to explore something totally unrelated.
And for him, entering medicine was that huge step.
A really intense one. The way he describes cadaver dissection,
Yeah.
it's incredibly raw.
Oh, yeah. The initial shock, unzipping the skin, the sound of the saw, he calls it unconscionable.
But then, almost strangely, it becomes routine. Tedious, even. He talks about just wanting a burrito while doing it.
That mix of profound and mundane again. But even in that, trying to objectify the body, little bits of humanity would peek through.
Like finding undigested morphine pills, a reminder of pain.
Or hearing a professor look at a body and say, "That's my age." It forces you to confront mortality in these really direct, sometimes awkward ways.
He mentions reading Shep Newland's How We Die around this time, and realizing you can only really understand death face to face.
That image of Newland trying manual resuscitation, covered in blood, failing. Paul saw that as the true image of a doctor, embracing that responsibility even when you can't win.
Right. He started seeing the doctor-patient relationship as the real-world stage for all those questions about human relationality he'd studied in books. Theory becomes practice.
Which leads us right into his residency experiences, that first night on obstetrics and gynecology.
Wow. Yeah,
Yeah.
he delivers these incredibly tiny, premature twins. Bird-like, he says, like preparatory sketches. Barely alive.
And then moments later, a perfectly healthy, full-term baby. Large, plump, wet.
The contrast is just brutal. And then the blow, learning those fragile twins died soon after.
He felt totally unprepared, like a premature lung himself, he says. It threw those impossible medical judgment calls into sharp relief.
Calls like, which is worse, being born too early or waiting too long?
Yeah.
You can't answer that with just science, can you?
No, it takes this moral clarity, something deeper than just knowledge. He's seeing firsthand that intellect alone isn't enough.
And dealing with that kind of moral weight is part of what drew him, surprisingly maybe, to neurosurgery.
He was really struck by a pediatric neurosurgeon who could navigate both the cold, hard facts of a kid's brain tumor and the intense human emotions of the family.
Connecting the data and the lived reality, he calls neurosurgery the crucible of identity. Why that specific phrase?
Well, because operating on the brain isn't like operating on a knee, right? You're manipulating the physical stuff that makes us, the substance of ourselves, as he puts it.
Wow.
So it forces everyone involved, patient, family, doctor, to confront that massive question, what kind of life is worth living?
Because you're asking people to make trade-offs, maybe lose speech or hand function or memory in exchange for more time.
It's not just about keeping the body alive, it's about the quality, the essence of that life.
And the training to even get to make those calls is depicted as just crushing 100-hour weeks sleeping in his car.
He sees people burn out, leave medicine entirely. And he talks about the heavy burden of deciding who gets saving, who doesn't, even feeling that saving someone to a purely vegetative state might be a worse outcome than death.
The book doesn't shy away from the toll. That story about the young guy after the motorcycle crash, a flurry of activity, then death. And Paul finds himself getting an ice cream sandwich near the body.
Yeah, he worries he's losing his empathy, having these moral slides.
And then his friend Lori from medical school dies after a car accident. That brings up all these fears of becoming numb, like those callous doctors Tolstoy wrote about.
But he also sees role models, residents who somehow keep that human connection alive, who can joke with patients, really meet them where they are.
He learns that staying open to that connection costs you something. You feel the suffering more, but it's absolutely vital.
And the story of his surgeon friend Jeff, who died by suicide after a bad patient outcome, it really underscores that onerous yoke of responsibility doctors carry.
This constant striving for perfection, knowing that ultimately death wins and failure is unavoidable. It's like chasing an asymptote, he says.
So neurosurgery becomes this intense crucible of identity, testing not just the patient's sense of self, but the doctor's too. The pressure, the ethical dilemmas, they force you to confront your own limits.
It makes you think about those high-stakes moments in our own lives, maybe not life or death surgery, but times when you had to make really tough calls with big consequences. How does those shape you?
They definitely do. And for Paul, that crucible was about to get intensely personal.
Right. He's 36, top of his game, residency almost done, the promised land in sight, and then the symptoms start.
Chest pain, losing weight, night sweats, cough. He sees his phone showing cancer stats for his age group, and this horrible realization starts dawning.
He describes the difficulty telling his wife Lucy, the strain it put on their marriage, even having couples therapy scheduled.
Then that stark airport text exchange. And finally saying it out loud to his friend Mike. I think I have cancer, and not the good kind either.
Just hearing himself say it. And then the call about the chest x-ray. She likely knew what it meant. I knew.
And the moment he checks himself into the hospital, as a patient, in the exact same kind of room where he used to be the one delivering the news.
That shift in identity must have been profound. From the doctor, the agent, the one doing things,
to the patient, the one things are happening to, being stuck in bed, needing help with basic things, the walker, the toilet seat, the sheer frustration and, humiliation.
his whole sense of self, tied up in being this capable surgeon, this runner. It's all challenged by his body failing him. Losing weight, the acne from treatment. He felt he was losing his looks, his physical identity.
But amidst all that, something remarkable happens with his marriage. They were struggling, but he says the cancer actually helped save our marriage.
How so?
It kind of burned away all the surface stuff, he says, getting them back to the core, the soft, nourishing meat of their relationship. Love stripped bare.
That's incredibly powerful. And then there's that scene at the sperm bank, filling out forms about what happens if one of them dies, just confronting the brutal reality.
The decision to have a child, though, that feels huge. Knowing his prognosis was so uncertain.
Paul wanted Lucy not to be left alone, husbandless and childless. But Lucy's response to his fear about saying goodbye, wouldn't it be great if it did? Meaning, wouldn't it be great to have that connection even knowing the pain?
It's this deliberate choice to keep living fully rather than just focusing on dying.
Even navigating IVF, he's aware of death's presence in the decisions about embryos. And then finally, a bit of good news, the first scan after starting Tarceva shows the tumor shrinking. A drop of hope.
Being a patient clearly transformed his view of medicine, didn't it? The little things doctors might miss, the paperwork, the taste of saline.
Absolutely, it gave him the patient's eye view. And his whole experience just forces you, the reader, to think about identity. How much is tied to our jobs, our bodies, our roles? What's left when those things change or disappear? How do you define yourself beyond those external markers?
It's a central question the book leaves you with. And amazingly, even in illness, Paul finds his way back to purpose.
He does. He decides to go back to surgery. His reasoning is so powerful. Because I could. Because that's who I was. Until I actually die, I am still living.
He adapts his physical therapy, focuses on building strength for the OR, and he turns back to literature, actively searching for a vocabulary to make sense of death, trying to translate his own experience into language others could grasp, like Hemingway, trying to find the words.
He gets a potential job offer, prestigious academic track, but he realizes research needs a 20-year horizon he just doesn't have.
Yeah, it mirrors Freud's choice, interestingly. Freud also shifted from pure neuroscience because the field wasn't ready for his ambitions, turning to psychology for more immediate impact.
And Paul finds himself drawn back to core Christian values, sacrifice, redemption, forgiveness, not as scientific fact, but as compelling truths about human existence. He sees science can't explain everything, especially the existential stuff. Mercy trumps justice, he concludes.
Human knowledge grows through connection, not just facts.
And then the end approaches. He sees the new tumor himself on his own scan, like a full moon. Describes it almost clinically, just a fact about the world.
But his response isn't clinical detachment. He decides to work one last day as a resident.
Finishing the assignments he'd made, the details of that day are heartbreakingly specific. Smelling eucalyptus, the M&M conference discussing errors, visiting a patient, scrubbing in one last time.
His determination to finish that final surgery, closing the skin perfectly, his way.
Lucy's epilogue then takes us into those final raw days, time accelerating, the struggle to breathe, the ambulance.
The BiPAP machine, the agonizing decision to shift to comfort care, and Paul's clear voice, I'm ready.
Just devastating. Those last moments with family saying, I love you, asking for the book to be published.
The vigil after they removed the breathing support, family holding hands, their baby daughter Katie there, singing, remembering. He fought to keep writing right up to the end, using special gloves for his fingertips, directing his care towards maintaining mental clarity for writing.
The book itself became his final act of purpose. trying to help others understand.
And Lucy's reflections in the epilogue about cancer being a nutcracker, bringing them closer, their love being the bedrock. It's the only way I know how to breathe, she writes about carrying on his legacy.
The description of his burial site, too. Overlooking the Pacific, a place they loved, visiting, talking to him, the deer eating the flowers. Nature continuing, intertwining life and death.
Lucy's final word is so important. His life was tragic, yes, but it wasn't a tragedy. The meaning was in the striving, the refusal to falter. The book is his way of continuing to help.
It's an incredible arc. Thinking about his return to writing and surgery near the end, what does that signify? And how did his whole understanding of meaning evolve from that young student asking big questions?
I think returning to those things was about reclaiming his identity, his purpose, living as himself for as long as possible.
Wow.
His idea of meaning definitely shifted from something you find in books or abstract thought to something you forge through action, through connection, through facing suffering head on. And the book, Lucy's words, they show that meaning can resonate beyond a physical life. Through words, through love, through the impact on others.
It absolutely makes you reflect on how we find purpose, how we live fully, especially when facing our own limits or mortality. So we've taken this deep dive into When Breath Becomes Air, tracing Paul Kalanithi's remarkable path.
From intellectual searching to the brutal realities of medicine and then his own confrontation with death.
His story really pushes us to ask what makes a life meaningful. It's about identity shifts, hard choices, deep connections, doctor-patient, husband-wife, parent-child, and that fundamental link between life and death.
He found meaning in the striving itself, even against impossible odds.
Which leaves us, and you, with something to think about.
What does it really mean to strive? Not necessarily for perfection, maybe, but for meaning, especially when we know life has limits, that things decay.
How does looking squarely at death actually teach us how to truly live?
Some heavy questions to ponder.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.